Hi guys, welcome to Twin Perspective. I'm Joe, and tonight I'm going to be presenting Act 2 of my retelling of Friday the 13th. This is my original idea based on everyone who's ever had anything to do with Friday the 13th. I pay homage, and this is, in my opinion, the perfect reboot. Make sure you go back and watch Act 1. Act 3 will be coming up next. But right now we have Act 2, and this focuses between 1957 and 1979. We're going to be doing some jumping around here, but we start right where we left off with Jason in Act 1, where he is walking deeper into the woods surrounding Crystal Lake. The woods stretch for 8 to 10 miles in this direction, and there's hardly anyone that lives in the wooded area. There are lots of old decaying structures dotted throughout, and Jason finds one that has at least a partial roof and somewhat of a structure. He decides to settle in on this one, which is actually about 2 miles away from the lake. He opens up his bag and he pulls out a food item. Then he pulls out his blanket and his pillow, and he lays on the ground and goes to sleep. It's his nap time, actually. Jason dreams of the events from the night before. He wakes from his nap. I would like for all of this to be silence in the movie, except for the sounds of woodland creatures and birds and stuff like that. It would create like a isolation feel. Um, the sun's shining. He exits the structure. He stands outside of it and he looks at it a good time, and then he starts searching into the woods. And he walks a quarter mile out and comes back. He finds a really small structure that's out there. It's almost non-existent, but there's tin and there's wood there, and he knows he can use that. So he has his utility belt with him, and he starts to dismantle this structure. And of course, he's organizing all of the contents as he's going, and he has the thing completely demolished in minutes. And then he begins to pick particular items from what he stripped, and he carries that back with him to his new home. Once he's at the structure, Jason begins to add the materials. He's got several boxes of nails that he put in the bag from the camp, but he's going to have to acquire more eventually, along with other much needed supplies, if he's going to survive out here. So we watch him put the last piece he's gathered onto his new home. He's got a completed frame for this room that he's sleeping in, and he's got boards across the section where there's no roof. Um, he's been standing on old milk crates, anything that he's found along the way. And sun's setting, it's beginning to get dark, so he goes to sleep. He's tired. In his dream, it's thunder and lightning and rain. He watches his mother die again. He wakes up, he realizes it's the middle of the night and it's raining. And although he's pretty much covered up, he's under that section of the roof that's there. The wind is blowing the rain on him. It's getting his blanket wet. It's getting his pillow wet. And he gets frustrated. He gets up and he decides to march out in the middle of the night, in the middle of the rain, back to that uh, deconstructed structure, where he grabs the rest of the materials, brings it back, and starts building on to the wall and the roof. By the time he uses up the materials, he's protected from this particular rain, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And then I'd like to get some glimpses, and one day after the other, not particularly the next day, but kind of stretching this thing out into the fall, where he finds another structure worthy of demolition and retrieval. As he's carrying the materials back, he begins to notice the wildlife. He sees a white-tailed deer. Later, he's building on his home. He observes a couple of rabbits. As he's working on his roof, he notices the squirrels that are in the tree. Collecting material from yet another demolition site, he notices a fox. We get to a point where it's dusk. We see that his home is much more fortified. Still doesn't have a front door. He pulls a food item out of his bag to eat, and he notices there's a coyote wandering around outside his structure, kind of peering back into the structure. The coyote ends up running away. On another day, Jason exits his home, and we see that he has a ton of material collected outside of the house. Material he hasn't used yet. He walks into the woods until he gets to a road. Now, this road is probably a good 8 miles away from the lake, 10 miles away from the lake. And there's no cars on the road. He stays in the woods, and he realizes as he's walking back to his home, he's demolished every structure there. Perhaps it's time for him to return to the camp. So when he gets to his house, he reaches in his bag. There's no more food. He definitely has to do something at this point. The winter's about to come. The house is almost built, but he needs more nails. He needs other stuff. So he hears his mother's voice reminding him that he is a survivor. So he takes a potato sack, puts it on his head. He's got one eye hole cut out. And he makes the 2-mile trek to the lake. He passes that fence that has the private property marked on it. He ends up walking down the dirt path. He's staring at the lake. He almost falls in the hole again that trapped him for that brief moment. He remembers that ordeal. He arrives at the pier. He gets a good look at the camp. There seems to be no activity going on, except for his constant images of his mother getting beheaded. So he approaches the camp. He examines the grounds. He enters every building. He finds this large rectangular wagon that's used to haul wood and supplies, and he decides to load this thing up. He's retrieved every item from the tool shed. He's disassembled a bed frame. He's got the mattress. He even grabbed a table and chairs. He's in the galley. He's got the remaining non-perishable food items. There's not much, not at all. He's got the rest of the cutlery. He's got the cookware. And now the wagon is fully loaded. It includes extra 2x4s. He's got rope. He's got fishing gear. He's got flammable liquids. He's got matches, nets, sheets, blankets, even curtains. He's loaded this wagon down, and he's going to drag this thing 2 miles back to his house. And he does notice that fence again. He notices that private property sign. He's never crossed that fence. But his pickings are getting slim. We fast forward to winter, and this could very well be the end of 1957, the beginning of 1958. He's still an 11-year-old, and he's done all of this. It's snowing outside. The house is fully realized at this point. He's even got the furnishings set up, curtains in the window. He's got a clearing outside that he's built a fire pit where he cooks food. And he's run out of the perishable items. So he decides to head to the lake again. When he arrives at the lake, he realizes that Bob's there. Bob's truck is there, and Bob is walking around the grounds looking at the buildings and checking on things. And Jason decides to run past the south end of the lake when Bob's not looking and decides to go back up the other side of the lake. Now, there's nothing there. The paved path is there that leads you to and from the camp, but there's no other structures there until he gets to a fenced area. There's no private property signs, so he crosses it. He's going to anyway. He wants to see what he can find, and he happens upon Packanack Lodge, which is on the east side of the lake. He's never been to that side of the lake, and Packanack Lodge is closed. There's nobody there, and he decides to take a closer look. It resembles a summer camp, but it's also used as a training facility for future camp counselors, as well as a training facility for wildlife enthusiasts. So there's some interesting stuff here, including one cabin that's just filled with literature about hunting and trapping. There's also an archery range. There's some sporting equipment. So Jason starts gathering as much as he can carry, which includes the literature on the traps and a baseball bat, some archery gear. And when he exits the lodge, he decides to continue on upward to the north end of the lake. And when he gets to that fence, there's a fence there with private property. He cuts a section out of the barbed wire from the fence, and he puts that in his pocket. He's keeping the barbed wire he cut. He gets to an area where there's a wooden fence that's easily scalable, but it marks off the yard to this property where there's a huge house. This is the Fields residence. And Jason notices Jenny outside building a snowman. Jason definitely recognizes her. And he creeps up as close as he can get, hiding behind trees. He steps on a branch at one point. The crack ends up making a really loud noise. But Jenny looks around, doesn't see anything, and Jason's still hiding. And whenever she has her back turned, he gets past the house. When he gets to the fence, he ends up cutting another piece of the barbed wire out, and he walks home with all of his new arsenal. Once home, Jason places all of the items against the wall in an organized manner, and he starts flipping through the books on hunting and trapping. And at this point, we're going to fast forward, through the next several years, where he's applying his new knowledge. We watch him set up a box with food as bait underneath, simple drawstring attached to a stick. Rabbit bounces toward the food. He pulls it, catches the rabbit. He gets up. He walks towards the box. The box starts to move because the rabbit's trying to escape, but Jason's got the knife right at his utility belt. He removes the box. He immediately grabs the rabbit by the ears, and he cuts the rabbit's throat. There's snow all over the ground. There's blood pouring out. He cuts it again. The body falls to the ground. He's holding the rabbit's head in his hands. Whether he remembers his mother at that point visually or not, I don't know. But he throws the rabbit head at the base of a tree. He bends down, grabs the bodies, and he starts removing the fur from the rabbit pretty skillfully. As dusk falls, Jason's got a fire going on in the fire pit. The rabbit fur is still laying there next to him, and he's got the rabbit's body on a big stick, and he's cooking it over the fire. When the rabbit's body's cooked, Jason grabs the fur. He walks into his house. He sets the rabbit carcass down on the table, and he walks into a back room which we've never seen. In this room, he has a shrine built, and he has his mother's head on the shrine. Next to the shrine, he has a pile of bones from the animals that he's killed, mostly rabbits, raccoons, squirrels, chipmunks, beaver. And next to the bones, he has a big pile of fur. And he throws the rabbit fur on the pile. And as he's walking out, he looks at his mother's head before he gets back to the front of the house, sits down, and starts eating the rabbit. He hears a noise outside. He looks out the window. It's a coyote again. It's heading towards the rabbit's head. Jason picks up the bow and one arrow. He cracks open the door. He shoots the coyote. He gets it. Coyote's struggling to get to his feet. Jason grabs the bat. Jason runs out there, raises the bat, and smashes it against the coyote's head. Then we see a coyote's fur being added to the pile. On another day, we see Jason perched in a tree. He's got his bow and arrow, and he's constructed a feeder on another tree, and there's a deer coming to it to eat out of it. And Jason shoots it with a bow and arrow. It starts to run away. Jason jumps down out of the tree, pulls the knife out of his utility belt, starts walking at a good fast pace after this deer. We see the deer jumping obstacles and stuff until it starts to struggle to even stay on its feet. And as it's standing there about to buckle, Jason leaps out on top of the deer and starts stabbing it with the knife. And Jason pretty much wrestles this deer down and kills it. And then he drags the deer back to his house. We skip forward. At this point in the story, we should be at about 1962. So I'm thinking Jason's about 16 years old. He looks like a 24-year-old. So, we're going to go with a different actor. At some point during this wood scene, this growing up in the forest scene, he keeps the burlap sack on his head anytime he's outside of his house. It's springtime, and he's actually outside the field residence. This is a routine of his. He goes there and watches Jenny. Jenny's next to the lake fishing. She's 16. She tells her mom she's going to take the canoe out. Her mom tells her to be careful. She gets in the canoe, and she starts rowing towards the south end of the lake. When she gets close to the camp, she never goes to the shoreline. She stays floating out there, and she looks at it, though, sometimes, and she looks at the pier, and then she notices something in the woods next to the lake. You see a burlap sack for a second, and then it ducks away. She's not quite sure what she saw, so she starts paddling the canoe back towards her house. Jason begins to follow her, but then he notices at the camp, Bob's pulling up. Jason decides instead of following Jenny back to her house, he's going to creep back toward the camp to see what's going on. Bob's actually joined by the Christies, and they begin talking about whether this is the summer they're going to reopen the camp. Bob said he thinks in 2 weeks they can have everything up and ready to go, so they'll be done in plenty of time for the summer. As Jason's hearing this, he also hears his mother's voice in his head telling him they cannot reopen this place. It's night. We see a sign that says Camp Crystal Lake reopening this summer. And we see Bob at the camp. He's testing all the generators and he's testing all the lights. And as he turns a section of lights on, it illuminates a section of the property, and Jason steps out from behind the tree. Bob sees the figure with the burlap sack on his head, asks him who he is, your own private property. Bob approaches him, asking him, are you the guy that's been stealing our stuff? And that's when Jason pulls the machete out from behind him and slams it in the Bob's shoulder. The force drives Bob to his knees. Jason pulls the machete out. Bob manages to stand up, and Jason shoves the machete in the Bob's chest, and we see the point come out the back of him. Bob falls down to the ground, dead. Jason puts his foot on Bob, pulls the machete out, puts the machete back on his utility belt behind him, and starts dragging Bob's body to the structures. He throws the body up against one of the camps, and Jason starts whacking away at all of the circuit breakers and wires that he sees with the machete. And then he starts dousing everything with the flammable liquid that's there, including Bob's body. Jason pulls a match out of his pocket and strikes it, sets the whole place on fire. As Jason's making his way down the broken path along the lake, we see a large explosion from the generators and the flammable content that's there. Yeah, Jason blows up Camp Crystal Lake. We fast forward to 1964. At this point, Jason's 18. So is Steven. So is Jenny. Steven is moving away from home. He's going to college. He tells his parents he's not sure if they should try to reopen the camp, especially since he's not going to be there to help. They tell him they're not sure if they're going to or not, but they're going to take another drive out there. And they also mention Bob and how he died in the explosion. The Christies get to the camp and realize that there's dead animal carcasses everywhere, including floating in the lake. A lot of the animals look like they've been mutilated. And the Christies decide right then and there, without Stephen being around, with them being older in age, with all the problems this camp is having, they're not going to do this. Louise goes to the store in Crystal Lake. The clerk there asks her if she's going to reopen the camp, and she said she just doesn't think they can. And then we notice another customer, Crazy Ralph, who tells her, well, that place has a death curse. It's cursed. And Louise is distraught and leaves the store, and the store clerk tells Ralph to quit spreading rumors about the camp. You know that was the owner of the camp right there, by the way. And we see the Camp Crystal Lake sign being replaced with Camp Crystal Lake closed. We're going to fast forward at this point to 1979, because we got a good grasp of what's happening with Jason. The camp's never going to open again, and he's surviving pretty well out there in the woods of Crystal Lake. In 1979, Jenny arrives. She's now, 33, 34 years old. She's back in town because her mom died. Her dad had died a few years earlier. Her mom died. And when we see her at the funeral, she sees Stephen. And they begin to talk. They haven't seen each other in quite a while. Stephen tells Jenny that his mom and dad have been dead since about 1975. And he still lives at the house. He moved in when they died, and he lives in Crystal Lake. And Jenny said, well, I've inherited the big house and the property on the lake, so she said, I think I'm moving in. Stephen decides to join Jenny for dinner and drinks, where their conversation gets a little more intimate. They begin to talk about the past. Jenny tells Stephen, that night when you and your dad had a heart attack and you and your dad left the camp, I fished for a little while longer, and then I saw Jason, and I tried to ride home on my bike, and Jason was following me down the path. And she said, I never told anybody that. I don't know if he drowned or not. And then that's when Stephen tells Jenny the story of what's happened to the camp, that items have gone stolen. Crazy Ralph's telling everybody that the place is cursed, and you got to kind of wonder because, you got to kind of wonder with the explosion, the fire, and then several years later, dead animals all over the place. And Jenny wonders if Stephen's ever going to try to reopen that camp. Stephen said, I don't know. If I do, I would need help. And Jenny said, I could help you. And Stephen says, it's got to be somebody I trust. And then they start to make out. It's about time, but Stephen and Jenny hook up. And that's the end of Act 2. Act 3 will be Jenny and Stephen trying to reopen the camp, and our final battle with Jason and the new counselors that arrive. If you're interested in that, subscribe to Rosenfield 10, and I'll be posting that very shortly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Whistle past the cemetery on your way home. And this has been Twin Perspective, and I'll see you in the trees. Bye.